mystery – тайна, doubt – сомнение, mysticism – мистика, foul play – предательство, terror – ужас, blackness – темнота, desperation – отчаяние, crime – преступление. In the late 19th century, the people in a rural upstate New York town were shocked to discover that one of their neighbors was a murderer. Lizzie Halliday was a cold, calculating psychopath who would kill without hesitation and without remorse. Lizzie Halliday, serial killer, a true crime short story. So dim the lights, light some candles, play some creepy music, and learn about Lizzie Halliday, who the New York Times dubbed the worst woman on earth. Welcome to the channel Victorian-era Criminal Stories by Mrs.D. Lizzie Borden Halliday took her ex in 1892, at that time when Jack the Ripper continued to haunt London over a string of murders. In fact, while Borden was acquitted and Jack never identified, Halliday was known to have killed 5 people, convicted of 1 murder, and believed to have offed many others. She was sentenced to die in the electric chair. That sentence was commuted, and she spent the last years of her life in the Medicine Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Dutchess County, where she killed her last victim, a prison nurse. She was front-page news all over the world. John Conway, Sullivan County historian, said about her in 2007, "It is a fascinating story, and the most fascinating thing is that there was such a broad geographic area and so many potential victims, no one is really quite sure how many people she killed." Chapter 1. A Criminal Protege. Mrs. Halliday's maiden name was Eliza Margaret McNally. She was born in the County Antrim, Ireland, in 1864. In 1869, she immigrated with her parents and 9 siblings across the broad Atlantic. The McNallys settled in the New York City, and growing up in the immigrant melting pot of the Big Apple, Elizabeth McNally developed a fearsome reputation. Her violent temper was well known and feared on the city streets, but it was an ugly characteristic which would result in her estrangement from her own family. Apparently, her murderous tendencies started fairly early, and you may need a scorecard to track her heinous exploits. McNally left home while still a teenager after numerous physical altercations with family members, and she went rambling around the eastern states until 1879, when she married Charles Hopkins in Pennsylvania. The couple had 1 son, but by 1881 Hopkins had died suddenly, and McNally was a widow. So here we are, at the very start of a rather terrifying story. Chapter 2. The Story of a Happy Married Life. Love in my heart was a fresh tide flowing where the star-like seagulls soar. The sun was keen and the foam was blowing high on the rocky shore. But now in the dusk, the tide is turning, lower the seagulls soar, and the waves that rose in resistless yearning are broken forevermore. She then married Artemus Brewer, a veteran and a pensioner, who died less than a year later. Do you think Lizzie was just an unfortunate wife, or we can notice a frightening tendency? It's quite natural that Lizzie was not finished with 2 marriages. The Times reporting on her trial in 1894 begged the question. Whether these men died natural deaths or were murdered is not known. McNally quickly moved on to husband number 3, who came in the form of Hiram Parkinson. Just weeks into the marriage, he vanished without a trace. Strangely, no one paid any attention to that woman, who widowed twice and lost track of her husband number 3. At this point, no one can deny Lizzie had an unfortunate first few years in America, but those who encountered her wrath were much less lucky. McNally married for a 4th time when she met Civil War veteran George Smith, a veteran who served with her 2nd husband. Months into the marriage, she spiked his tea with arsenic. Smith survived the attempt on his life, and before he could bring his would-be killer to justice, she had already fled, along with all of his money. McNally emerged months later in Bellows Falls, Vermont, where she married Charles Plaistow, the only one of all her husbands who could be called young, and then she disappeared herself 2 weeks after the marriage. She resurfaced in the winter of 1888 in Philadelphia, where she befriended Irish immigrant family the McQuillans. They kept a saloon. McNally had changed her name to Maggie Hopkins, and with the money she stole from previous husbands, she set up a shop, which she later burned down in an insurance scam on St. Patrick's Day in 1888. How symbolic. McNally was convicted of arson and was sent to the Eastern State Penitentiary for 2 years straight. During her imprisonment, McNally's son, who had accompanied her during her rambles and marriages across the eastern United States, was carted off to a juvenile institution in Pennsylvania. Apparently, McNally's son also carried the same violent traits as his mother. Chapter 3. And There Comes Lizzie Halliday. When McNally was released, she changed her name to Lizzie Brown. She turned up in Newburgh in Orange County and found employment as a housekeeper for elderly Civil War veteran and widow, Paul Halliday, who resided on a farm in Sullivan County in upstate New York, about 20 miles from Newburgh. In 1890, she married him, though the neighbors later said the marriage was just his way of avoiding having to pay her. And here she became known as Lizzie Halliday, the name for which she would go down in the annals of criminal history. Paul had 2 sons from his previous marriage, who Lizzie had a strange relationship with. Lizzie Halliday was known for behaving violently and erratically, but her husband often found excuses for her behavior. Their married life does not seem to have been pleasant, the Times reported later. She soon eloped with a neighbor, stealing a team of horses in order to accelerate their flight. In Newburgh, her companion deserted her, and she was arrested. Her counsel entered a plea of insanity, and she was sent to an asylum, from which place she soon induced her husband, dear old Paul, as she has called him since, to secure her release. Lizzie convinced her husband to gain her release from the asylum, and she returned the favor by burning down his house, a barn, and a nearby mill, killing one of his sons in the process. In 1893, McNally burned down her husband's mill, while his son John was inside it. John, who was disabled, perished in the fire. Lizzie Halliday was suspected of burning the house down because of her history of arson and her alleged disdain for her stepson. After an attempted escape, she was apprehended and sent to an insane asylum. However, after doctors claimed she was cured, she was sent home and returned to her husband. McNally made her way back to Sullivan County in August of that year. The same month, Paul Halliday mysteriously disappeared. In a protracted interview with Robert Halliday, the eldest son of the murdered man, he made the following statement: "This woman came from the same county in Ireland as my father." He told me this himself. He first met her in an intelligence office in Newburgh, where he secured her services as a housekeeper. Sometime after he married her. None of the family liked the woman. Her appearance was against her. She did not conduct herself as a wife should. My father, however, was infatuated with her. She held a peculiar influence over him which nothing could shake. Soon after his marriage to the woman that gave her name as Lizzie Halliday, there began the peculiar succession of crimes, which finally led to her being committed to the insane asylum. First, there was the burning of the house, then the burning of the barn, and finally, the burning of the old mill where my father, his wife, and brother John lived, in which fire my brother lost his life. Following this, at a stated period, came her theft of the team of a Newburgh liveryman. She hired a horse and buggy in Newburgh on the statement that she was a poor Irish servant who wanted to visit her sick mother. The man let her have a horse and buggy. She drove out of town, and within 24 hours had sold the rig and horse to some gypsies. She was arrested, tried, and found not guilty on the ground of insanity. 2 fires in my father's place occurred in quick succession. After a longer period came the conflagration in which my young brother perished. For this crime she was arrested, but on the ground of insanity was remanded to the insane asylum at Middletown. She remained there a while, was then sent to another asylum, and finally was released as cured at my father's request. My father told me subsequently to these affairs that his wife at the time of their commission was in a condition peculiar to women, that when in that condition she was subject to spells of insanity. With the disappearance of the physical condition, there was a disappearance of the criminal tendencies. I begged my father to leave the woman, but he would not listen to me. When Paul Halliday disappeared, Lizzie told the neighbors that he was traveling. Neighbors and family who witnessed McNally back on Halliday's farm at the same time as his sudden disappearance feared the worst and contacted the police. With a search warrant in hand, Sullivan County lawmen went searching the farm for Mr. Halliday, but instead they found two bodies under a haystack in a barn. The deceased turned out to be Margaret and Sarah McQuillan, the wife and the daughter of the man who had provided Lizzie a home in Philadelphia. They had both been shot. When she was apprehended, she would not cooperate, as she behaved erratically. However, many suspect she was faking insanity. A few days after the bodies of the McQuillans were found, a stench coming from beneath the floorboards of the Halliday house drew the attention of the police. There they found the mutilated body of Paul Halliday. He too had been shot, but his body had been horrifically tampered with. When questioned, McNally spoke gibberish and tore off her clothes. After being charged with triple homicide, the deaths of her previous husbands also came into question. It was later revealed that Halliday told her stepson, Robert, she also killed her husband in Ireland. Lizzie was charged with crimes and confined to Sullivan County Jail to await trial. Her time there was not uneventful. Within a few months of her confinement, she refused to eat, attacked the sheriff's wife, set her bed on fire, tried to hang herself, and cut her own throat with broken glass. For the last 3 months, it has been necessary to keep her chained to the floor. Chapter 4. The Electric Chair Sentence. Judge Edwards, presiding the peculiarity of her case, tended to draw a large number of people from diverse parts of America to witness the trial. The actions of her counsel, George H. Carpenter, of Liberty, evinced a design to rest the case on the plea of insanity. The district attorney, however, believed that he had evidence which would controvert any such plea and prove this a case of murderous perversity. She was very taciturn, refusing absolutely to say anything to anyone. The prisoner was very pale from her long confinement, but the jail physician said she was in good physical condition. All about the floor of the cell were strewn storybooks and magazines, in which she seemed to take special delight when alone. Some at the time believed that she was not really insane, only acting so. Conway doesn't buy that. There were attempts to diagnose her condition and somehow tie that to her motivation, but I don't know how successful they were, he says. She seemed just flat-out crazy. During her time in the county jail, Lizzie became a national celebrity of sorts. The New York City newspapers soon discovered the Halliday saga and gave it front-page coverage. Papers from around the country soon followed suit. The world's coverage did not stop there. Enterprising columnist Nellie Bly also capitalized on the sensational aspects of Lizzie's life and made 2 trips to Monticello to interview her. Some tabloids claimed she had killed people in Belfast before arriving in the States, but that claim was not true. Some tabloids even made claims that she had a connection to Jack the Ripper, a claim which was also highly fictitious. In 1894, she was convicted of the murder and was the first woman in U.S. history to be sentenced to death by electrocution. It caused a sensation. Upon hearing the verdict, McNally lunged for Sheriff Harrison Beecher and bit his hand. The sheriff's hand and arm later got infected, and the lawman lost it to amputation. So New York Governor Roswell Flower decided to commute her sentence to life in a mental institution. She spent the rest of her life at the Metropolitan State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, where she was constantly a source of trouble, attempting to escape a number of times and assaulting several attendants, including Nurse Nellie Wickers, who was stabbed with a pair of scissors 200 times in 1906 after she told Lizzie of her plans to leave the hospital for other employment. Obviously, Miss Wickers died from her wounds. McNally had married 6 times. 2 husbands had died suddenly. 2 husbands disappeared. One was almost poisoned and another was shot dead. She had killed her stepson in a fire while her own son was institutionalized. She shot dead 2 fellow immigrants and stabbed the nurse to death. The woman from County Antrim had the eastern states of America in a grip of terror in the late 19th century. And even when she was under lock and key, she was still dishing out waves of violence. Elizabeth Margaret McNally died on the 28th of June in 1918 and was buried in an unmarked grave in the grounds of Metevan State Hospital. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. So many criminal stories are yet to come. See you.